Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The heavy, gilded doors of the obsidian throne room slammed shut with a violence that shook the marble floors, echoing the shattering of yet another aristocratic ego. "Get him out of my sight," Prince Valerius snarled, his voice a low rumble of thunder that vibrated in the chests of every guard present. "If I have to smell one more doused in rose water, power-hungry Omega trying to trigger my rut with artificial pheromones, I will burn this palace to the ground." The rejected suitor, the 100th son of a duke to be paraded before the crown prince of Ethelgard, was dragged away sobbing. Valerius, the empire's cold wolf, slumped back onto his throne. He rubbed his temples, a headache pounding behind his eyes. His pheromones were spiking, not from desire, but from sheer, unadulterated aggression. He was the strongest alpha the bloodline had produced in centuries, a man who viewed mating not as a necessity, but as a shackle. The court whispered that he was broken, incapable of love. They were wrong. Valerius wasn't broken. He was simply bored by the prey that threw itself into his mouth. He needed something real. He needed silence. And he would find it in the only place the courtiers dared not tread, the royal conservatory. The conservatory was a sanctuary of glass and steel, a humid jungle trapped within the frozen capital. It was here that Julian, a man whose hands were stained with soil rather than silk, was currently trying to perform the impossible, keep a 5-year-old quiet while tending to the rarest orchids in the kingdom. "Leo, please," Julian whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Just sit under the fern. Draw your pictures. Papa just needs 10 more minutes to graft this moonbloom." Julian was not a noble. He was not a suitor. He was a horticulturist, hired on a temporary contract because the royal gardener had died, and Julian was the only one in the city who knew how to keep the emperor's favorite poisonous flowers alive. He was also an Omega, a fact he hid under layers of beta scent blockers and baggy work clothes. He was a single father, a widow who had clawed his way out of poverty after his bondmate died in the war. Leo, a small boy with messy curls and eyes too big for his face, nodded solemnly, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. "I'm a statue, Papa. Statues don't talk." "Good boy." Julian went back to work, his heart hammering. He shouldn't have brought Leo. It was against protocol. But the sitter had canceled, and Julian needed this paycheck to afford Leo's suppressants. The boy was showing signs of being an Omega early, and his health was fragile. The air in the conservatory shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure, a sudden, overwhelming weight that made the fine hairs on the back of Julian's neck stand up. The birds in the high canopy went silent. The very air grew thick, charged with the scent of ozone, burnt cedar, and blood. An alpha. A prime alpha. Julian froze, his pruning shears hovering over a stem. He signaled frantically to Leo to stay hidden behind the giant fern leaves. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel path. Prince Valerius walked into the clearing, his military jacket unbuttoned, his cravat loose. He looked like a predator pacing a cage. He stopped 10 feet from Julian, his back turned to the gardener. Valerius inhaled deeply, expecting the cloying sweetness of the flowers. Instead, he paused. He frowned. Valerius turned slowly, his eyes, hues of piercing, icy blue, locking onto Julian's crouched form. "You," Valerius said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute command. "You aren't palace staff. The gardeners wear gray. You wear brown." Julian scrambled to his feet, bowing low, keeping his eyes on the gravel. "Your Highness, I am the specialist contractor for the moonblooms. I apologize for my presence. I was told the conservatory would be empty." Valerius stepped closer. He didn't care about the explanation. He was focused on the scent, or rather, the lack of it, and what lay beneath. The blockers Julian wore were cheap. To a nose as refined as Valerius's, they were like trying to hide a forest fire with a sheet of paper. Beneath the chemical smell of the blockers, there was something faint. Rainwater. Freshly turned earth. Wild mint. It was the cleanest thing Valerius had ever smelled. "Look at me," Valerius commanded. Julian hesitated, then lifted his chin. He had survived hunger, the war that took his husband, and the scorn of society for being a single Omega father. He would not cower, even before a prince. Their eyes met. Valerius felt a jolt in his chest, a physical kick of instinct that stunned him. This man was beautiful, not in the painted, porcelain way of the courtiers, but in a raw, enduring way. There was dirt on his cheek. His hands were calloused. His eyes were the color of warm honey, filled with fear, yes, but also a defiant spark. "What is your name?" Valerius asked, stepping into Julian's personal space. The sheer size of the prince blocked out the sun. "Julian, your highness." "Julian," Valerius tested the name. It felt heavy on his tongue. "You smell like rain." Julian stiffened. I have been working with the irrigation systems, my lord." "Don't lie to me." Valerius reached out, his gloved hand hovering near Julian's neck, right over his scent gland. "You are an Omega, hiding in my palace." "I am working," Julian snapped, the fear momentarily eclipsed by indignation. "I am not one of your suitors, prince. I have no interest in your throne or your bed. I am here to fix a plant, get paid, and leave." Valerius blinked. Silence stretched, thick and tense. Then, the corner of the prince's mouth twitched. "You have no interest?" Valerius murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from Julian's ear. "Do you know that 100 Omegas wept today because I wouldn't look at them? And you just want to get paid?" "Yes," Julian breathed, his heart rattling his ribs. Snap! The sound of a dry twig breaking echoed like a gunshot. Valerius whipped his head around, his eyes narrowing into slits. His predatory gaze zeroed in on the large fern in the corner. Who was there? Julian moved before he thought. He threw himself between the prince and the fern, his arms spread wide. "No, it's nothing. Just a stray cat. Please, your highness, let me." "Move," Valerius growled, the alpha command vibrating in the air. Julian's knees buckled under the weight of the command, forced by biology to submit, but his will fought it. He sank to his knees but grabbed Valerius's coat. "Please. He's just a child." Valerius paused. The prince brushed past the trembling Omega and pushed aside the fern fronds. There, curled into a ball, clutching the stuffed rabbit so tight his knuckles were white, was Leo. The boy looked up, terrified. He had the same honey eyes as Julian. Valerius stared. He was known as the Butcher of the North, the Cold Prince. He did not like children. They were loud, sticky, and weak. But Leo didn't cry. The boy looked at the giant man looming over him, sniffed the air, and wrinkled his nose. "You smell like a storm," Leo whispered. Valerius froze. The pheromones rolling off the prince were enough to make grown men faint. This tiny creature just categorized it. Valerius crouched down. It was a movement of fluid grace. He was now eye level with the child. "A storm?" "Yes," Leo said, his voice trembling but honest. "Scary. But like when the rain breaks the heat." Valerius felt a strange tightness in his throat. He looked back at Julian, who was still on the ground, looking ready to fight a dragon with his bare hands to save his cub. "Is he yours?" Valerius asked Julian. "Yes. He is my son. My life," Julian said, his voice shaking. "Punish me for the intrusion, your highness. Fire me, but let him go." Valerius looked from the fierce, terrified father to the small, honest boy. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of the crown, the noise of the court, the headache. It was all gone. The scent of rain and earth soothed the storm inside him. "Stand up, Julian," Valerius said softly. Julian struggled to his feet. "You are fired," Valerius stated. Julian's face crumbled. He needed that money. He opened his mouth to beg, but Valerius cut him off. "You are fired as the contractor," Valerius corrected, standing to his full height. "Because I am hiring you as the royal keeper of the conservatory. Permanently. With residence in the East Wing." Julian gaped. The East Wing? Your Highness, that is the family wing. I cannot." And Valerius continued, ignoring him, looking down at Leo. "The boy needs a tutor. The palace scholars are sitting idle. He will start lessons tomorrow." "Why?" Julian whispered, bewildered. "Why are you doing this?" Valerius stepped close to Julian again. He inhaled the scent of rain, letting it settle his alpha instincts. "Because," Valerius said low, "you are the first person in 10 years who didn't look at me and see a crown." And Valerius glanced at Leo, who was cautiously poking the prince's shiny boot. "He is the first one to tell me the truth about my soul." The arrangement was supposed to be professional. Julian tended the plants. Valerius came to sit in silence and work on state papers. But the court was a pit of vipers, and secrets in the obsidian palace had a short shelf life. Rumors flew. The prince has a whore. The prince is keeping a street urchin. As the weeks turned to months, the dynamic shifted. Valerius found himself bringing toys, ridiculously expensive, hand-carved soldiers, for Leo. He found himself lingering in the greenhouse long after sunset, watching the way the golden light caught Julian's hair. The cold prince was thawing, and it terrified the establishment. The breaking point came during the winter solstice ball. It was a mandatory event. Julian was not invited, but Duke Lysander, a man whose nephew had been rejection number 99, orchestrated a cruel trap. He forged a summons, calling Julian to the grand hall to deliver flowers. Julian arrived wearing his work clothes, holding a basket of moon blooms, walking straight into a ballroom filled with velvet, diamonds, and sneers. The music stopped. The laughter was sharp and jagged. "Look," Duke Lysander boomed, his voice dripping with mock pity. "The prince's pet gardener. Did you get lost, little rat? Or are you looking for scraps?" Leo, who was holding Julian's hand, shrank back. "This is a place for nobility," Lysander sneered, stepping forward. He kicked the basket of flowers from Julian's hands. "The pot shattered. Clean it up, and then crawl back to the mud where you belong." Julian trembled. The shame burned his cheeks. He knelt to pick up the shards, whispering to Leo to keep his eyes closed. "Did you hear me?" Lysander shouted, grabbing Julian's shoulder roughly. "I said, boom." The double doors of the ballroom didn't just open. They were blasted off their hinges by a wave of pure, concentrated alpha force. The temperature in the room plummeted. Guests dropped to their knees, gasping for air, crushed by the sheer weight of the dominance rolling into the hall. It wasn't just anger. It was murderous intent. Prince Valerius walked into the silence. He was dressed in ceremonial black and silver, a saber at his hip, but his eyes were glowing with a feral, red-rimmed light. He didn't run. He stalked. He crossed the ballroom floor in seconds, the crowd parting like water before a shark. He stopped behind Julian. Duke Lysander, realizing his mistake too late, released Julian and stumbled back. "Your Highness, I was just disciplining the staff." Valerius didn't look at the Duke. He looked down at Julian, who was kneeling in the dirt and broken pottery. Valerius extended a hand. Not a command this time. An offer. "Julian," Valerius said, his voice eerily calm, contrasting the violence of his aura. "Stand up." Julian looked up. He saw the rage in Valerius's eyes, but he also saw the desperate protectiveness. He took the prince's hand. Valerius pulled him up, and in one fluid motion, pulled Julian against his chest, wrapping a protective arm around his waist. Then, Valerius picked up Leo with his other arm, settling the boy on his hip. The image shocked the court into paralysis. The cold alpha prince, holding a commoner Omega and another man's child like they were the crown jewels. Valerius turned his gaze to Duke Lysander. "You speak of nobility," Valerius said, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent hall. "You think nobility is blood? Titles? It is conduct." Valerius stepped forward, forcing Lysander to cower. "You touched what is mine," Valerius whispered, low enough for only Lysander and Julian to hear, but the menace was loud enough to stop hearts. "You insulted my future consort. You frightened my son." The gas that went through the room sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Asterisk consort. "Son, asterisk. Your son," Lysander stammered. "But the bloodline. The bloodline ends with me if I say it does," Valerius snarled. "And it begins where I choose. Leo is under my protection. Julian is under my protection. If you ever look at them with anything other than reverence, I will strip your title, burn your lands, and leave you with nothing but the dust you just made him kneel in." Valerius turned to the room. "The ball is over. Get out." It was a stampede. Within minutes, the hall was empty save for the three of them. The adrenaline faded, leaving Valerius shaking slightly. He set Leo down, who immediately hugged Valerius's leg. "You were scary," Leo said. "But you saved Papa." Valerius looked at Julian. He expected to see fear. He expected the Omega to run from the monster he had just revealed. Instead, Julian stepped forward. He reached up, his calloused hands cupping Valerius's face, pulling him down. "You are not cold," Julian whispered, his thumb stroking the prince's cheekbone. "You are burning up. They hurt you." Valerius rasped, leaning into the touch, starving for it. "I wanted to kill them." "I know," Julian said softly. "But you didn't. You saved us." "I will always save you," Valerius vowed. "I rejected the world to find you, Julian. I'm not letting you go." Julian smiled, and it was the first time Valerius had seen a true, unburdened smile on his face. It was brighter than the sun. "Then take me home, Valerius. Take us home." The prince, the wolf of Ethelgard, smiled back. He scooped Leo up in one arm and wrapped the other around Julian's shoulders, walking them out of the cold ballroom and back toward the warmth of the greenhouse. The rumors were wrong. The prince wasn't cold. He had just been saving his warmth for the ones who deserved it. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, not with chains, but with the scent of rain and a child's trust. If you enjoyed seeing Valerius burn the kingdom down for his family, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, if you were Julian, would you trust a prince with a reputation for cruelty or run to protect your child? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, dramatic lighting. Man 1. Prince Valerius, tall, broad shoulders, black military uniform with silver embroidery, intense icy blue eyes, dark hair, protective stance, arm around waist of Man 2, holding a small child on other hip, expression of fierce possessiveness. Man 2. Julian. Shorter, slender build, messy honey brown hair, wearing simple gardener clothes with dirt smudges, looking up at Valerius with trust and awe, blushing. Child. Leo, small boy, curly hair, holding a stuffed rabbit, clinging to Valerius. Background is a grand ballroom, with shattered flower pot on floor, blurred terrified nobles in distance. Magical atmosphere, cinematic composition, sharp focus, emotional gaze.